The events shifted to the past, when the teenagers had just arrived at the cable car, and no one yet knew about the terrible virus that would take so many lives. Kang Ji-hoon was having fun and enjoying himself. His jealous gaze fell on Hong-mi. She was just filming with Yeon-woo and his friend Jubin. The first thing Kang Ji-hoon thought when he saw Yeon-woo was, why would anyone want to interview such a guy at all? Kang Ji-hoon felt jealous because he couldn't let that person get closer, even though he really wanted to. So he wondered if Hong-mi and Yeon-woo were close. After all, it was Lee Yeon-woo, the nerd and the quiet one. The events returned to a terrifying reality where ordinary teenagers had to fight monsters for their survival. Kang Ji-hoon incinerated one of them with a flamethrower. He was left breathless after such a battle, unable to move. Yet before he had been the fastest in class. In this moment of weakness, the monster did not wait. It had plenty of strength. Suddenly, it lunged at Kang Ji-hoon and devoured him. Yeon-woo's father was in despair. He was losing people one by one. Damn monsters. Suddenly, inside the mouth of the scumbag that had eaten Kang Ji-hoon, a light began to burn. It burned his mouth from the inside. This teenager never gave up even when it was too late. The monster fell to the ground. Now it was out of strength. Kang Ji-hoon approached the monster and aimed the flamethrower into its open maw. The teenager's body and face were covered in the monster's slime. He had long been infected but had held on with those pills. Kang Ji-hoon himself couldn't move, but he could end the monsters and give others a chance to survive. After that, it was hot. Behind him, Yeon-woo's father tried to reach Kang Ji-hoon, but the military stopped him. The man shouted words of support to the teenager. Kang Ji-hoon asked him what he was doing and why he hadn't left yet. After all, the monsters were waiting for them. The soldier told Yeon-woo's father that if things continued like this, they would all die, so they had to leave immediately. Kang Ji-hoon didn't turn back. He was ashamed to look into their eyes. He asked to tell his friends that he was a failure and had run away alone. Yeon-woo's father was forcibly removed. He resisted until the end. Kang Ji-hoon said that was indeed his intention. He said goodbye to his friends. He said he was doing it not for them. Kang Ji-hoon just wanted revenge and to kill at least one monster. After all, he would definitely regret it if he died foolishly. Suddenly, the teenager remembered Park Choa and said it was all thanks to her. After that, Kang Ji-hoon ran towards the monsters. He had a reason to take revenge, for whom to take revenge. Meanwhile, the soldiers were descending the stairs to the exit. Yeon-woo's father was worried about the children, wanting to ensure they were safe. But there was one problem. Monsters were coming for them, and there were many. Events were unfolding too quickly. Somehow the monsters had gotten to them. Meanwhile, the teenagers were outside, in relative safety. They were deciding whether to wait for Yeon-woo's father. Park Choa wanted to wait for one more, Kang Ji-hoon. But the teenagers decided to run, as they would all die otherwise. Nearby, across the street, there was a monster that heard them, and it was running straight for the teenagers. They ran, but the monster was chasing them. Soyon was lagging behind, even though she wasn't the last to run. Kang Ming grabbed her hand so she wouldn't fall behind. It was a very sweet gesture he made subconsciously. In moments of danger, everyone showed their true nature. The teenagers hid behind a pillar of a building together, but the monster did not leave. It just stood there and waited. Kang Ming said he would distract the monster if it came to them, while Soyon ordered her to go into the alley for now. But she was busy with something else. She said Yeon-woo was coming to them in a car. There was hope and joy in her words. She wanted to see him. Isuri and Park Ming were hiding behind a bus stop. For some reason, no one ran after them. Park Ming was outraged that the rest of the classmates were foolish for splitting up at such a moment. They saw the monster from the bus stop. It did not see them. Isuri silently endured this idiot beside her. She told Park Ming to hide first while she wanted to look around. Isuri explained to his dissatisfied expression that they needed to gather their friends. Park Ming snidely asked if she was planning to go look for them, after which he cowardly ran away without a hint of doubt, shouting that he was even glad. And he ran into the building as if to search there. Isuri actually didn't care about his fate. Park Ming ran up the stairs and laughed that they were all foolish, and he could hide in a safe place while Soyon called for Yeon-woo. He stopped by the window to watch how they would all fight in vain. The monster below suddenly sensed something. It was somehow attracted to the building where Park Ming had entered. Kang Ming told Soyon in a serious tone to go to Yeon-woo, while he would stay here with the others. Soyon was outraged, but Kang Ming interrupted her. He was as serious as ever. He quietly told her he didn't understand why, but Isuri was watching Soyon. Soyon was rendered speechless. She had never been suspicious enough to raise distrust. Kang Ming said that was why he had brought Soyon here alone. She decided that he was disappointed in her because she hadn't mentioned her correspondence with Yeon-woo, but he denied it. After that, he asked if Soyon knew why Isuri was called the Queen. Meanwhile, guests arrived for Park Ming. He heard the monster's screams and turned in shock at them. Park Ming didn't understand where the monster had come from in the building. He thought he was the smartest. His heart was pounding wildly. Meanwhile, Isuri approached and shone a flashlight. She heard Park Ming's and the monster's screams, but her face remained unchanged and indifferent. Meanwhile, the military and Yeon-woo's father were not faring any better. The monsters were catching up to them. One of the soldiers was pleading desperately for a flamethrower. Only it could help here, as the rifles were ineffective. Suddenly his wish was heard, and the monster was set ablaze. The soldiers and Yeon-woo's father were shocked to see their savior. It was Chon. He saved them and told the father that the children had left and were talking about his son, Yeon-woo. The man was left speechless by what Chon said next. The children said they would see Yeon-woo soon. After that, the homeless man ordered him to follow him so he could lead him. Meanwhile, Park Ming was screaming, trying to escape from the monster, but he was failing miserably. And eventually, what this narcissist feared most happened. He was captured by the monster. Park Ming's life ended in that very second. At that moment, Kang Ming told Soyon the reason why Isuri was called the Queen. Kang Ming's voice grew quieter. He said it was because the others had no chance to run further. They had seen her with their own eyes. Isuri stood behind the door of the building and watched as the monster devoured Park Ming. The classmate saw her, and his last words before death were a wish for Isuri's death as she simply turned around and walked away. Park Ming called her names as if she were to blame for this. Meanwhile, the military and Yeon-woo's father were running from a pack of monsters. The monsters merged with the Han River, which could have a very negative impact on the ecology. The soldier said that while the rifle had a clear effect, killing monsters with it was nearly impossible, only if shot up close. He continued that it was best to shoot the flamethrower into the mouth to kill the host's cells. The soldier told Chon that was why he had such an important role. The homeless man replied that he didn't even know if they would survive at all, but they would definitely maim the monsters. Suddenly, his expression changed sharply. Fear was evident in him. After all, the monsters continued to advance, crawling out of the Han River. The soldier explained that they were attracted by military uniforms. The monsters were literally chasing the army. He explained that the monsters were coming from the Han River, and the cells began to hunt the soldiers. So he told Yeon-woo's father that they would hold out as long as they could, and he had to run when the moment came. He said that he and Chon were not cowards, and that the soldiers would survive without them. Yeon-woo's father said that the military had to think about their families. They were someone's sons, too. It seemed to have an effect on the soldier, as the father spoke from the heart. His words carried that pain. But there was no time for long talks. The monsters continued to rise from below. Yeon-woo's father ordered Chon to prepare the flamethrower, but he was almost out of fuel. They wouldn't last long like this. Yeon-woo's father said they wouldn't hold out and needed another way. Meanwhile, outside, Kang Ming was looking for Isuri. He was calling for her, but she did not respond. He came to the place where they had all dispersed. Suddenly, he remembered his friend, Kang Ji-hoon. After all, they hadn't even seen him and didn't know if he was okay. Kang Ming hoped he was safe. Suddenly, he finally saw Isuri. She seemed to be hiding between the buildings. Isuri asked if he had seen anyone else, but the answer was negative. He added that he hadn't even seen the older ones, and the monster that had been chasing them had also disappeared. Suddenly, Kang Ming noticed something strange about Isuri and asked what had happened to her. There was something off about her gaze. She immediately averted her gaze when Kang Ming asked about it. She put on a mask of indifference and replied in her usual style. But Kang Ming stood his ground and said that she had the same gloomy look during the accident last year. He began to recount the first, hoping it would make Isuri speak. He told her that Soyon had left, and Park Choa was with Sun Yeon, and then he remembered that Isuri had been with Park Ming. And then the classmate drew out a long ah, as if she had completely forgotten to mention something unimportant, after which she briefly and calmly said that Park Ming was dead. She added that he was eaten by a monster, so Kang Ming didn't need to search for him anymore. He grabbed her hand and asked what she was talking about. Isuri immediately jerked her hand away and asked if Kang Ming wanted to die. but he knew her well and did not react to this, ordering her not to lie to him because he knew everything. Kang Ming shouted. All his emotions burst forth, and he said he knew everything Isuri had tried to do to Park Ming. She became interested in these words. Kang Ming continued to shout and asked her to be honest with him. Isuri turned around, told him to back off as she didn't care what he thought. Kang Ming lost his patience and began to yell. He asked, rather stated, that Park Ming had died because of Isuri. She suddenly stopped and fell silent. Kang Ming calmed down. He was scared by his own words and asked if Isuri hadn't done that. He spoke with hope. She interrupted him and turned around, asking what if he was right. Kang Ming was once again filled with anger. He shouted loudly and tried to explain to Isuri that he wasn't joking, as there were boundaries that couldn't be crossed. He said he was worried about Isuri because she had gone too far. Then she couldn't take it anymore and hit Kang Ming in the stomach. Her words about concern had driven her mad. She screamed about the scumbag who had been with Park Soyon and asked if Kang Ming really thought those guys didn't know. Isuri could not be stopped. She said that Kang Ming had promised her she would see Yeon-woo before Soyon. He regained consciousness after the blow, called Isuri a fool, and repeated that Soyon was not infected, just as he had said. Isuri screamed that it didn't matter whether Soyon was infected, as she would only hinder the use of Yeon-woo. She continued, saying that was exactly why Kang Ming claimed he had taken that dishonest photo. He asked Isuri that if she didn't need the photo, why was it dishonest? After which, Kang Ming asked if she considered anyone her friend at all. He opened up to her, saying that back in the church, he thought that when Isuri said she would sacrifice herself in rock, paper, scissors, Kang Ming had thought for a moment that Isuri had changed, but he turned out to be an idiot. Suddenly, they heard a very loud explosion. A building was on fire. They immediately forgot about the argument and now thought only of the explosion. Isuri asked why anyone would do such a thing, then simply walked away, adding that she was the one who would remain the victor regardless. Kang Ming was left alone. Meanwhile, Isuri moved closer to the fire. She understood that this was not just another fire. It was an explosion. Bodies of soldiers lay nearby. It would be difficult for Isuri to retrieve a weapon, as she was covered in debris. All her attention was focused on the fire. Therefore, she did not notice the quiet footsteps approaching her. This encounter certainly did not promise to be pleasant. Isuri said aloud that the sound of the explosion would surely bring everyone here. Suddenly he responded that he had come. Isuri immediately recognized the voice of Park Ming. He called her a loose woman and accused her of his death. She screamed while Park Ming asked why she wasn't smiling, as he was glad to see her again. Isuri immediately began to run while Park Ming took a weapon from a soldier. He said he didn't understand why she was treating him this way, but Park Ming was taking medication for cancer. Therefore, the monster spat him out. He probably wasn't tasty. Isuri's blood ran cold with fear. After all, the worst monster is a human. Park Ming took the weapon and aimed it at Isuri, saying it was karma. Someone was running quickly toward them. Someone who wanted to make it in time. It was Kang Ming. He lunged at Park Ming and knocked him off his feet. He ordered her to run. Park Ming and Kang Ming began to fight. Kang Ming said that even if he killed Isuri now, what would come next? First, they had to heal Park Ming. This stopped him. Kang Ming always knew how to penetrate a person's mind. He explained to Park Ming that there was only one way. He melted the cells not with fire, but with water. Kang Ming tried to convince him that even if he was angry at Isuri now, it was still not too late to start treatment. He promised to help. Park Ming closed his eyes and cursed, after which he asked if Kang Ming was serious. There was mockery in his voice. Kang Ming promised that he could be trusted. Then Park Ming threatened him with death if he didn't heal him, and Kang Ming agreed to these terms. He did it for Isuri, perhaps, or simply acted on moral principles. He dropped the weapon and said there was a thermos in his bag, after which an explosion occurred. Blood splattered on Kang Ming's suit. Park Ming laughed and called him an idiot, then asked how he was doing. Kang Ming was in shock. Everything happened too quickly. He didn't understand what was going on. Isuri stood behind him. She saw everything. All of this happened because of her. She screamed Kang Ming's name, after which she called Park Ming a twisted scumbag. Isuri could not believe what had happened. It felt as if the ground had slipped from under her feet. Park Ming smiled and said he wanted to hear her last words. He aimed and ordered her to speak before he shot Kang Ming again. The look in that scumbag's eyes was insane. Kang Ming held his hand over his wound, from which blood was flowing rapidly. Isuri didn't know what to do, but she knew she had to do something. Park Ming awaited action. He was a beast who had tasted blood for the first time, and now he could not be stopped. And Isuri simply ran away. Park Ming chased after her, saying that even here she hadn't changed. Kang Ming was left alone once more. Park Ming was having fun, as if he were playing games. He searched for Isuri. For him, it was a game of hide-and-seek. When he found her, he immediately opened fire. Park Ming said that Kang Ming would die because of her. Die like a dog. He did not stop shooting and simply told her to accept this simple truth. Suddenly, his ammunition ran out. Park Ming immediately discarded the weapon, after which he went for another rifle. There were plenty among the soldiers. He suggested that Isuri also take a weapon covered in debris, so it would be a fair fight. Isuri hid behind a car and searched for something in her bag. Park Ming promised to shoot her filthy head as soon as he saw Isuri. He walked right past the car where she was hiding. Isuri's heart raced, adrenaline surged. Suddenly, a Molotov cocktail flew at Park Ming. He certainly did not expect this, but managed to dodge a bit. Isuri missed. The cocktail flew toward the soldiers. This would hinder Park Ming from grabbing a weapon, but the scumbag remained alive nonetheless. Isuri immediately ran. It seemed she had no more cocktails. She ran straight toward the fire. Park Ming was annoyed. He followed her, saying that even in the fire, Isuri could not hide from him. Suddenly, he stopped because he noticed something. On the glass doors, he saw her. A self-satisfied smile immediately appeared on that scumbag's face, indicating that he had won. He approached the cars and asked Isuri if it was her. Park Ming acted like a true maniac, intimidating his victim with his words. There were also insults. He called Isuri stupid and said she had always treated everything lightly. Park Ming laughed because he already felt the taste of victory. He asked if Isuri really had not seen a mirror, after which he abruptly stepped out from behind the car and lunged at Isuri with shouts and a weapon. But something stopped him. Park Ming was in shock, because there was not Isuri, but only her clothes and bag. And the soldier who was on fire was missing a weapon. This was all because it was with Isuri. She stood right behind Park Ming and aimed. Isuri screamed that she did this because a classmate had deceived her. Park Ming turned around and was shocked. He certainly did not expect this, as narcissists never think they can be wrong. And this played a cruel joke on him. He was too overconfident. There were many gunshots, but lying on the road was not Park Ming. It was Kang Ming. It seemed he had tried to crawl, but he lacked strength. Before dying, he remembered Soyon, how he had given her a hammer from the bus. Her wonderful smile and incredible beauty. Not a single Yeon-woo could resist her beauty. He apologized to Soyon. It was hard for him to help her now, but she wanted him to care for someone else as well. She had asked for help then. Soyon had once asked him why he helped her, and he simply wanted to see her smile. Kang Ming was ordered to get up. Only one person could do that. Isuri. She called her savior an idiot. This jolted Kang Ming back to life. This girl always knew how to bring him back to his senses. He asked if Isuri had cried when he saw her face. It was raining, but he clearly saw the tears in her eyes. Isuri began to scream that she had not cried. It was he who cried and called him a stupid scumbag again. After which she asked why he was even injured. It seemed that this was how Isuri's apology sounded. She screamed so loudly, it was a scream of the soul. She ordered Kang Ming to get up faster and promised that she would not feel pity for him. He replied that he already knew that, and that what had happened didn't matter. Kang Ming said that all of this didn't matter, just like the fact that he was dying. He asked if he could ask Isuri for something. She responded in her own style. Kang Ming told her that he had actually promised Soyon. He spoke very poorly, barely piecing it together. It was so embarrassing to ask Isuri for this, but he did. He asked her to help Soyon in his place. Meanwhile, Soyon was running at that moment. She was doing it with all her might and had almost reached the place. Suddenly, a monster appeared around the corner, and it was running straight after Soyon. She had almost reached Yeon-woo. She just needed to turn the corner. The monster immediately lunged at her, but it did not reach her. Soyon froze in fear. The monster, for some reason, did not move or attack her, and she was afraid to turn her back. Suddenly, she noticed something, and her expression changed. He was running toward her. Even from a distance, Soyon recognized him. It was Yeon-woo. He immediately bombarded her with questions about where his father was. Yeon-woo yelled at the monster, ordering it to get the hell out of there. Soyon thought she knew why Yeon-woo was so obsessed. He placed his hand on her shoulder, after which he aggressively asked where his father was. Soyon thought others would laugh at her, but the closer Yeon-woo got to her, the more she liked it. Soyon stared at him with glassy eyes, as if she had become special. But in reality, he was the special one. Yeonwoo ordered her to say where his father was quickly. He told her to come with him. In fact, Soyon had known this from the very beginning. She knew that Yeonwoo liked her. But so much had changed since then. She had made many mistakes. Then Ham Song-yu called out, shouting at Soyon to stop flirting. She held Yeonwoo's hand. Nuna watched this with dissatisfaction. Yeonwoo was climbing the stairs of the burning building, calling for his father. His cries grew louder because his father was the only one he had. He could not lose him. But Yeonwoo saw nothing. He begged for his father to be alive, as he would never forgive himself. Yeonwoo would never have thought he would have to save his father. After all, he had always been so strong. There was a soldier on the stairs. Yeonwoo asked him if he had seen a man in a white suit. He realized who was in front of him and whom he was searching for. He ordered him to go higher. The soldier said that his father had blown up the gas machines. He spoke very laboriously and ordered Yeonwoo to flee faster. He asked to convey to his father that he had tried to protect him. In the end, he added that the other soldiers were safe thanks to his father. Yeonwoo saw his father and immediately ran. His heart was pounding wildly. He longed to hear his breath. The events shifted to another room on the stairs. Yeonwoo's father sat unconscious while others talked about the Han River. Suddenly he began to wake up and murmured. Choeon immediately heard this and rejoiced that Yeonwoo's father had awakened. He asked how the man felt and said that he himself had barely survived. Next to Choeon stood the leader of the bandits. Yeonwoo's father did not understand what was happening and where he was. Choeon explained that this was a room near the parking lot and that this young man nearby had saved them. But he denied that it was his role, rather it was his son's. In that corner stood Yeonwoo, his son. The father was immensely happy. He was ready to give everything for this moment. The leader said that the little boy had been looking for his father, jumping into the fire unprotected. It was brave. Choeon laughed and asked if the father had heard this, adding that it was his little boy. Yeonwoo risked his life and saved them. The father could not believe it and asked his son if it was true. Yeonwoo remained silent, just looking down as if feeling guilty and afraid to meet his gaze. After which he said that he had no choice because his father was in danger. But the father interrupted Yeonwoo and began shouting that his son was out of his mind. He yelled that Yeonwoo should not have gone into danger. No one asked him to save them. After which he called his son an idiot. His reaction was very strange, but it seemed not so for Yeonwoo. The father continued to shout and ordered him not to do such foolish things again. Yeonwoo interrupted him in the shouting, saying that he himself had not been careful at first, and it was because of him that his son had to run into the burning building. The man stood up, called his son by his full name, and said that his father was worried about him. Yeonwoo simply left the room. The father continued to shout and ordered him to come back. Behind stood Choeon and the leader, who felt very ashamed and uncomfortable in such a situation. The man fell silent, coming to terms with his anger, after which he asked the leader what his relationship was with Yeonwoo. The father heard the leader say then that he was going to the Han River. Meanwhile, Yeonwoo went outside and sat in the rain. He didn't care. He was angry at his father. Yeonwoo saved him, and he cursed him. It frustrated him that his father always treated him like a child. But in any case, it was better, as Yeonwoo saw with his own eyes that his father was alive, so he could leave everything and return to the Han River. Suddenly, someone interrupted his stream of thoughts. It was Soyon. She asked if she could sit next to Yeonwoo. She asked why she couldn't reach him, as everyone else was here together, and wanted to know if there was a way to contact Yeonwoo. But it seemed he didn't want that himself. Soyon said it was strange because she was about to meet Kang-ming now. Yeonwoo didn't listen to her. He thought about whether his dad would be very angry at him if he went to the Han River, after which he lowered his head. Soyon realized he wasn't listening to her. She wanted to quickly come up with an idea for conversation, and she succeeded. Soyon remembered the cap and put it on Yeonwoo's head. He thanked her without even looking up. But then Soyon said it looked much better, just as she expected. And this made Yeonwoo look at her. She added that his cap didn't look good on her, but it looked better on him. And she added that now he didn't have to worry about his hair. Soyon was acting strangely, saying some nonsense. She said they hadn't even washed their hair once during this time, and at that moment, her expression changed sharply. She began to take Yeonwoo's cap away because her dirty hair was making it smell. He said it was fine, but Soyon acted like a madwoman. The guards asked Yeonwoo if he was making them jealous, hinting at the relationship between the two of them. Yeonwoo denied that it was so. after which the guards left and told them to stop flirting and get ready because they were going to the Han River. Soyon knew nothing about the river. She thought there had been some mistake, as she hoped Yeonwoo would stay with them, but there was no mistake. Yeonwoo apologized, saying he had something to do at the Han River. He added that he thought it was best for them to part ways here again. Yeonwoo didn't even look Soyon in the eye and simply asked her to take care of his father, because his father and she couldn't go with them. This simply crushed Soyon. She had other plans and didn't want it all to be like this. Then a shout from the father was heard. He could barely move, but he had the strength to shout, and he ordered Yeonwoo not to even think about going to the river as he heard everything. The father yelled at him like he was a little kid. He said his son was out of his mind to take such risks. Yeonwoo interrupted him, saying it was just like his father setting the parking lot on fire and nearly dying. This made the man realize he was wrong. Yeonwoo said there was something only he could do. He said he could get rid of the cells if he left, because there could be people like his mother there. The father was furious and asked why Yeonwoo should even care about that. Why couldn't someone else do it? Yeonwoo interrupted his father and said it was his fault and made his mother that way. If he didn't return there, he wouldn't forgive himself. He wanted to see his mother one more time. It seemed the father understood everything. Then he agreed and asked if there were still free spots to go to the Han River. The leader said there were still 3 or 4 free spots, so he would fit. Yeonwoo began to shout at his father for what he was about to do. Dad said he would go with him because he was his father, and he would be there if something went wrong. And since he was his father, he also had to meet his mother. Suddenly, their argument was interrupted by someone's cursing. Only one person could speak like that. It was Isuri, and she was alone. She spoke in a commanding tone, saying she didn't care if they were busy, but she had business with Soyon. She threw Kangming's backpack and asked if she had anything to find there. Soyon's expression changed sharply. It seemed she understood something but didn't want to believe it. But she definitely knew it was Kangming's backpack. And for some reason, it was with Isuri. Isuri ordered Soyon to take the backpack because that was what the scum wanted. After a pause, she gathered her strength and said that Kangming wouldn't be coming anymore. Isuri said it looked like he wanted to secretly join them but died on the way. Soyon screamed that she was lying. Even others reacted to her screams. Hamsong you too. Soyon couldn't find the words. Her heart was pounding wildly. She screamed that this simply couldn't have happened. Isuri held her face. The rain washed away all the tears. She asked Soyon if she would survive after a gunshot wound to the chest. If so, then Isuri was lying. Even at such a moment, she spoke sarcastically. Soyon couldn't comprehend anything. 1,000 thoughts swirled in her head, and her heart was about to break into pieces. She asked who among them had held the weapon on their shoulders, and added that Isuri sounded a bit shameless. Isuri looked down and fell silent. Yeonwoo tried to hold Soyon back and asked everyone to calm down, asking what had happened. Isuri said it was all because of her. Because of her, they thought Kangming was dead, so she had nothing to say. To those who blamed her for the death of a friend, after which she called Soyon a bitch. And then Isuri suddenly went mad and lunged at Soyon. Yeonwoo tried to calm her down. A crazy chaos ensued. Isuri screamed and blamed Soyon for everything. Why did she hate her so much? Words from Kangming spun in her head when he asked her to help Soyon. Events shifted to the past. Isuri was asleep but woke up to a male voice. Kangming was holding a weapon and listening to instructions on how to handle it. Isuri woke up and asked what he was doing with an empty rifle. It turned out he was watching a tutorial video from some military. He joked that Isuri should have been the first to learn, as she was the only one who was actually studying. She turned away and said to hell with studying. And then she said that Kangming knew that the thing she hated the most was studying. But he was shocked by such a confession. He said he had seen her all the time only studying since middle school. Isuri asked who in this world actually loved studying, and added that she was just trying to achieve first place. Kangming fell silent for a while, then said it was probably hard. He sympathized with her, and then he said it must have been hard for Isuri to do all this time what she hated. She replied that Kangming was talking like an old man, and then asked him to send her the link to that video. Meanwhile, events returned to reality, where a YouTuber was streaming. This was already his 5th part about survival on the Han River. He was just talking with his subscribers about various things. Tanks were on the bridge nearby. The blogger spoke strangely at times. Even the comments said it was time for him to take his medication. Then he said that only Seoul survived, because there were several reasons for that. The blogger elaborated on this for a long time and with enthusiasm. After, he looked at the analytics, and the content about the Han River was bringing in a lot of money. Then he went to Lee Taeyang, who was under the bridge. He greeted an old friend, but then his expression changed sharply. Because Lee Taeyang was acting strangely, he didn't even respond. Then he turned back, as he finally noticed the blogger and said that the stream ended too early today. He saw the strange expression on Lee Taeyang's face and couldn't contain his shock. It was disgusting. He seemed to be stuck to the bodies of infected soldiers. It looked very gross. After, Lee Taeyang stood up and stretched, saying it was nothing serious. But the blogger couldn't calm down. He was outraged. He asked if Lee Taeyang had infected these people and condemned such actions, but he said not to worry about it, as it was just a bunch of infected people. The blogger kept looking around. Lee Taeyang asked how his stream went. He looked at those soldiers. They wouldn't leave him alone, but he tried not to show it and talked about his cool analytics. But the blogger couldn't help but think that all of this was dangerous. Lee Taeyang asked how people reacted to coming to Seoul. The blogger decided it didn't matter anyway, as his channel was growing rapidly. He told Lee Taeyang not to worry about it, as after all the subscribers still listened to him. Then the blogger recalled receiving a letter, a report about the person with immunity, Lee Yeon-woo. Lee Taeyang silently stared at the blogger, but his mood had clearly shifted. Meanwhile, the events shifted to a burning building. There stood Park Choa. She looked at the pile of monsters that someone had burned. She said she had expected this. Everything looked as if he had been there. But this time, Park Cho was late. Before her lay her friend, Kang Ji-hoon, without signs of life. Inside her was emptiness. That's how the loss of an important person felt. She recalled their first meeting. At that time, she felt they were similar. Even when Kang Ji-hoon was with his friends, it still felt like he was lonely, just like her. Outside stood Song-yeon, trembling with fear. Park Choa walked past her and ordered her to go. Song-yeon asked if they were just going to leave without Kang Ji-hoon, since Park Choa was carrying his backpack. Park Cho replied briefly and emotionlessly that he was not there. She did not turn back, lowered her head and said she just thought he might be here. But she was mistaken, and she said that perhaps Kang Ji-hoon had fled somewhere else. After which, she simply left. They fled quickly because monsters were everywhere. Song-yeon asked her to tell her honestly why Park Choa was so worried about Kang Ji-hoon. She replied that it was just her heart. It was drawn to the hated one. And she added that this was why she was with Song-yeon. Meanwhile, a black car drove across the bridge. Inside sat Choan, Yeon-woo's father, with the chief. And behind them were Yeon-woo, Isuri, Soyon, Nuna, and Ham Song-yu. The chief asked how they were doing in the back, and Yeon-woo said it was fine. The guards joked that Yeon-woo was sitting among girls, so he was comfortable. Yeon-woo said it was not like that, and in reality they were very cramped. Soyon sat next to him, barely holding back tears. She sniffled quietly. Yeon-woo said he couldn't believe that Park Ming had done this. Ham Song-yu shouted and told him not to believe it. Park Ming couldn't have shot Kang Ming. He yelled at Isuri, accusing her of lying and actually killing Kang Ming. She did not react. Ham Song-yu stood his ground and yelled at her to look at him. But Isuri simply looked down, holding her head in her hand. Then Yeon-woo turned around. Ham Song-yu could not calm down. At that moment, Nuna intervened and ordered him to shut up because he was really irritating her. Then she turned to Soyon and said that the real scoundrel was that idiot. He should understand the situation. And then she added that Soyon was probably close to Kang Ming since she had been crying the whole way. She apologized for having to deal with her for no reason. But her reaction surprised her, as Nuna said that Soyon was probably having a hard time now. Suddenly she also began to cry, all because her friends had also died, and she knew how painful that was. The girls began to support each other. Nuna noticed that Soyon's hands were very cold. She said she was worried about her since there would be chaos by the Han River, and no one knew if everyone would survive. But Soyon did not understand what was happening. She suddenly felt very scared. Then Nuna realized that she didn't know anything about what would happen by the river. Meanwhile, the driver of the car suddenly noticed something. There was something ahead of them, a pile of barricades. They couldn't reach the bridge. Chon got out and asked to clear everything. Yeon-woo's father told the chief that he had warned him that they were going to dump illegal substances into the Han River. He continued that he didn't know how they had lured his son, but if they gave him any dangerous task, or involved him in indecent behavior. Then he wanted to let them all know that he definitely did not support such ideas. The chief apologized, but thought that the father clearly did not know his son well. This shocked the man. He had never heard anything like it before. Yeon-woo overheard this conversation. He did not like any of it. Why was the chief even talking to his father? His train of thought was interrupted again by Soyon. She screamed that these people were selling illegal substances and worried that Yeon-woo shouldn't touch anything. Ham Song-yu interrupted the conversation, laughed at Soyeon's innocence, and said they were actually going to watch how drugs were dumped into the Han River. Soyeon was shocked. Ham Song-yu didn't know that they hadn't told them anything and explained why they were doing this. The girls began to scream that it was dangerous. Ham Song-yu told Soyeon not to worry because she had Yeon-woo, who was very cool. Yeon-woo was annoyed by this, and he showed it with his expression. Suddenly, Isuri spoke up. She realized why he had been in pain all the time in hiding. His cells were connected to the monsters. And then she asked if pumping the monsters with drugs, would everything be okay with him then? Meanwhile, the guards had already cleared the road, and they drove on. A guard addressed the boss. He asked if the chief had noticed that a damn fly kept buzzing nearby. The chief said he would keep an eye on them. He added that it was obvious who it was. In the car that was following them behind were two guys. One of them was Minsik. He asked his partner if the chief knew that he had allowed him to stay alive. The cars entered the tunnel. Suddenly, Minsik began to brake, because in the tunnel, all the cars were overturned and he did not see the boss's car. Minsik slowed down. Behind the blue bus, the guards were hiding, holding weapons and ready. Suddenly, Minsik was called and he tensed up. The guards stepped out and began to shout. Then Minsik's expression changed sharply. His heart raced. After all, the guards had opened fire on the car. He ducked down with his partner, but it was clear they were not welcome. The leader was smoking a cigarette and said he had been lenient, saving his life. Minsik sat on the floor, trembling and crying. The boss said he was now openly biting the hand that fed him. Minsik began to scream, begging to be allowed to speak. They said they had something to say, that they had information. A strong fear was evident in his voice. The leader stated that he didn't need any information. Minsik shouted about immunity, claiming they had found a person with immunity nearby. The leader was unfazed because he knew about Yeon-woo. Pak Jun shouted to Yeon-woo. He stepped out of the car. Pak Jun said that this guy was dangerous. He added that he recognized him for the first time when they met. Pak Jun knew that Yeon-woo had been on his brother's show. It seemed that Lee Yeon-woo understood who he was talking about, calling him a strange YouTuber. Pak Jun was offended, asserting that his brother was the best YouTuber. He added that he had told him they were heading to the river, and they were nearby. Yeon-woo was struck by this information, as the blogger was his enemy. Suddenly, he began to feel something in his hand. The guard noticed that two had entered the tunnel, so he ordered them to leave, threatening them. It was the blogger and Lee Teen. He immediately contacted Yeon-woo, and the boy felt it. Lee Teen said he was glad to see Yeon-woo with thoughts of his murder. Before he could finish his sentence, a furious, angry teenager was running at him. He ran and shouted that Lee Teen shouldn't be there. Yeon-woo had accumulated so much rage. Lee Teen stood calmly, after which his expression began to change. Lee Yeon-woo couldn't believe his eyes. Lee Teen opened his arms as if for a hug, and from his face, virus cells began to emerge. They then lunged straight at Yeon-woo. The teenager couldn't do anything. Everything was happening so fast. Lee Teen wanted to test how much Yeon-woo had evolved during this time. Yeon-woo said that Lee Teen seemed to have given up being human now. He laughed and said it was all thanks to Yeon-woo. He had done this to him, back when they were at the Han River, during their little fight. Lee Teen said this was the result of the struggle for survival, and Yeon-woo didn't even know how he managed to do it. He had to survive like a cockroach. He ate any cells he found. Suddenly, his conversation was interrupted by the sound of a gunshot and a hole in the cells. It was Yeon-woo's father. He stood up to protect his boy. He ran towards them, ordering his son to flee. The father acted like a mother this time, and it could become a mistake. Yeon-woo was scared, so he told his dad it was dangerous. Lee Teen had no trouble killing another close person to Yeon-woo. The father ordered Lee Teen to stay away from his son. He replied that he couldn't do that because he had to kill first. Then, a couple of bullets passed through Lee Teen's ugly face. Guards appeared behind the father. The leader said it was disgusting, after which he ordered them to deal with it quickly, as he was almost getting goosebumps. They completely forgot about Minsik and his partner. Meanwhile, the blogger was filming everything. He hid behind a car and couldn't wait to see how much money this video would bring him. Meanwhile, monsters appeared outside, and they came to the sound of gunfire in the tunnel. The guards now had another problem, defending themselves from the monsters charging at them. The father shouted to Yeon-woo to run. Lee Teen suggested playing more seriously. Yeon-woo was furious. He pulled out some cells from behind. Then he threw them at Lee Teen and told him to eat some of this. But nothing worked for Yeon-woo. Lee Teen intercepted his attack, saying that such an attack wouldn't surprise him. Lee Teen asked if Yeon-woo was trying to take revenge for his mom. This drove the teenager mad. Lee Teen bit into Yeon-woo's cells and said they were strange and didn't taste like anything. Then he spat it out and said he had overestimated Yeon-woo. The leader ordered them to stop and start the car. Suddenly someone called Sang-juna by name. It was Min-sik. He lunged at him with a knife, saying he had been waiting for the day he would make the boss bleed. He swiftly aimed the knife at Sang-juna. Min-sik spoke about finishing middle school, someone used to being in a juvenile detention center. Sang-juna asked what he was doing. He held the knife in his hands, which never reached his body, after which he asked what Min-sik was smoking to act so sweetly. Then Min-sik called his partner, shouting for him to hurry up. The masked boy with a knife suggested the boss make some sashimi out of him, after which he swung the knife, but Sang-juna dodged. And not just dodged, he managed to take the initiative and grab his attacker. He threw him to the floor. Then he placed his bloodied fingers on the attacker's eyes. The assailant understood what was about to happen, and the boss pressed on his eyes. The attacker screamed in agony. Then Sang-juna added that he was lucky to encounter such a handsome guy like him, after which the boss stood up as if nothing had happened. It turned out he wasn't so simple and could stand up for himself. Suddenly his gaze fell on the knife. While the attacker tried to get up and see something, a new dose of suffering awaited him. Min-sik watched in horror how cruel the boss was and what things he wasn't afraid to do. Blood dripped from the boss's knife. Min-sik began to scream at Sang-juna that he was a scumbag, but the boss remained calm, which frightened him even more. He advised Min-sik that if he wanted to wield a knife, he should do it like this, and then he would be scary. Min-sik could have wet his pants just from the boss's gaze, so he began to run, threatening to kill the boss if he followed him. But Sang-juna wasn't even planning to run. He simply asked Min-sik if he really intended to go that way. He stopped, as there was a pile of hungry monsters in front of him, and at that moment, Min-sik realized that his worthless life had come to an end. The guards at that moment called the boss, saying they had to leave quickly. Sang-juna said it was already too late for that. The other side was also filled with monsters. Therefore, he told the guards that they could not do this from the outside, so they would do it inside. And he ordered them to bring the items because they would burn them here. Meanwhile, Lee Tain was fighting with Yeon-woo. He commanded the teenager to stop fighting and become part of his body. He would take care of his cells. Yeon-woo said that Lee Tain called him foolish, but he was no different from him. He continued that it was good to bring this just in case, since the cells were on his hand. They were not ordinary. He brought some flesh that was in the club, and eating them like this was very reckless. Suddenly, Lee Tain began to feel something strange. Everything before his eyes started to blur. He was under the influence of drugs. Lee Tain suddenly realized that he had been defeated. He was mistaken. Yeon-woo was pleased that his plan had worked, and now he had the upper hand over Lee Tain. Meanwhile, the guards began to set everything on fire. Everything was in smoke, so he called for Yeon-woo. The chief warned him to be careful, because the drugs were simply in the air. Yeon-woo looked at the boss. He pulled on a mask and reminded him of what he had said, that Yeon-woo had to be careful around the smoke. The boy did the same and told Lee Tain that it was now his turn. Earlier, Yeon-woo had heard their conversation. The chief was overseeing the entire process, while the teenager stood nearby. He asked the guards why they were still wearing masks. Sang-juna said that the strongest drug addiction was through injection. In 20 seconds, they penetrated the brain, but there was another way to deliver drugs to the brain quickly. This method was deadly for the cells. It took only 7 seconds. Yeon-woo grabbed Lee Tain, after which he told him that when he inhaled the smoke, the drugs penetrated the brain very quickly. He did not know how this affected uninfected people, but for the cells, this smoke was deadly. He grabbed the cells that were on Lee Tain's face and then ripped them out in one swift motion. Lee Tain screamed and held his face in pain. Yeon-woo asked if it hurt, and then added that compared to the pain he felt, this was nothing. After which he ordered Lee Tain to get up, for from now on, Yeon-woo would show him true hell. Lee Tain looked and realized that it was truly the end for him, for he saw that the smoke affected the monsters just as it did him. Afterward, Lee Tain told Yeon-woo that he could not believe he had prepared something like this for him. Then the teenager pulled out some more cells, after which he began to approach Lee Tain. Yeon-woo asked if he still felt pain, after which he swung those cells at Lee Tain. He tried to dodge Yeon-woo, but nothing worked. The effects of the substances were taking their toll. Lee Tain thought that Yeon-woo must also be affected by the drugs that were penetrating through him. Yeonwoo asked him if it felt like helplessness. After all, Lee Tae had previously toyed with others. Lee Tae asked Yeonwoo about his good work when he infected his mother. This angered the teenager. Lee Tae was trying to manipulate him this way. He continued that he had seen it by the Han River, and added that they then mercilessly burned all the infected people. Lee Tae tried to say more bad things, for his body no longer obeyed him. Yeonwoo simply walked away. He was filled with rage. Lee Tae tried to signal for the monsters to help him while his mind completely abandoned his body. Suddenly, Yeonwoo turned around because he noticed something. He asked Lee Tae what signals he was giving in such a state. He was shocked that Yeonwoo understood this. The teenager said they were exactly as he remembered them. Yeonwoo had seen this in the shelter before. It looked like neural chains, and now they were the same, this electrical signal. Such a signal, as if exchanging cells? Lee Tae did not believe it and said he could not see this. He was joking. Yeonwoo was surprised that Lee Tae did not see this. The man could not believe that this little stupid boy could see something he had not noticed. Yeonwoo swung and said that Lee Tae saw nothing because he was an idiot. The man could not believe it. From their first meeting, it no longer seemed like Yeonwoo was the idiot who understood nothing. It turned out that only Lee Tae's cells reacted sensitively. They warned him of a higher entity, like an instinct for survival. Yeonwoo's father fell to the ground. Chon approached him to help him up. It seemed that the homeless man was more resistant to such substances, and then he told Yeonwoo's father that his son was intact. The chief then told the children that they were leaving because there was nothing to do here. Isuri was staring intently somewhere. She was looking at Lee Tae and Yeonwoo, and Lee Tae was looking at Yeonwoo. Suddenly, the teenager was overcome with such hatred. He ran, saying that it was not over yet. The father called his son. He told him that it was enough. But Yeonwoo disagreed. He believed that this scum should suffer more. After all, his mother. His mother was gone because of this piece of trash. Dad said that it was also hard for him to endure all this anger. He tried to calm his son, saying that the mother only thought of his safety, and he and the mother never wished for their son to ruin his life now for revenge. The father asked Yeonwoo to act accordingly for his mother's sake, for even if he did such things, the mother would not return. Yeonwoo clenched his fists tightly from all the rage within him. It appeared when he looked at Lee Tae, so Yeonwoo simply turned away. But then Lee Tae spoke. Yeonwoo stopped and listened. Lee Tae said that the boy would regret this for a long time if he just walked away now. Yeonwoo ordered him to shut up, for his flesh was still under the influence of drugs, so Lee Tae might not even try. He asked if the teenager really thought he could just end it like that. Suddenly, someone started shooting at Lee Tae. It was very unexpected. It turned out to be Isuri. She said that Lee Tae had asked to be killed himself. Then she added that it wasn't enough. And then she demanded a flamethrower in a commanding tone. The chief stood nearby, completely confused. Then Isuri yelled at the dealer, asking if he was deaf. She ordered him to bring the flamethrower, and quickly. The guard went to burn Lee Tae. Lee Tae laughed, continuing to act like a maniac even in such a situation. He said that soon Yeonwoo would find out. They would meet again at the Han River, as he should have interfered with his work. The guard asked what this idiot meant, after which he opened fire and ordered everyone to take cover. Lee Yeonwoo simply turned away. He didn't want to watch his enemy die. Meanwhile, the blogger was still filming everything. He was already thinking about how cool the video he would make would be, but he celebrated too early. Yeon-u approached him and asked for the phone back. He asked what the blogger was doing with Lee Tae-in. The blogger acted defiantly, questioning how Yeon-woo could behave like that. Suddenly, guards appeared behind the teenager, aiming at the blogger. Then he changed his tone and asked what he wanted to see first. A black car was driving back. The blogger said he couldn't believe he was about to show Yeon-woo unreleased videos. Nuna shouted that it was disgusting that he was filming. And Ham Song-yu said he had been subscribed to the blogger since he had only 10,000 subscribers. They were having a sweet conversation among themselves. The blogger showed footage from the bridge. Lee Yeon-woo watched it closely. The guys continued to chat sweetly, but Yeon-woo interrupted them, asking where the blogger had filmed this footage. Then he asked if he knew what had happened there, as his assistant had also been killed by a monster. The blogger began to scream aggressively that his friend had died for this purpose. He had become a popular YouTuber. Suddenly, he turned to Soyon. The girl tensed up. For some reason, he grabbed her and asked what that was about. He yelled at her about Park Ming, whom she had pulled from the Han River. Ham Song-yu tried to calm the blogger down. The blogger said that Park Ming had killed his assistant. It wasn't just cells. He wanted to know where that scumbag was. Yeonwoo's father and Chon began to yell at the blogger, demanding that he take his hands off her. The blogger said that, actually, he was the victim here. Suddenly, he was told not to touch her. That tone always made everyone shut up and listen. It was Isuri. She said that the scumbag had died because she burned him with fire. Soyon was shocked. Isuri asked why she should have left him alive as he had killed Kang Ming. Then Ham Song-yu intervened, saying that Isuri was increasingly showing her true side and asked how far she would go. Isuri simply showed him the middle finger. They all began to argue and fight, shouting at the top of their lungs in the car. The chief suggested they step outside and take a break. They went out and discussed the plan. The guard said they had used too many drugs, and the army would definitely try to stop them. So they wondered if the boss was really going to carry out that plan. Sang-juna asked the guard if he remembered the time when that scumbag said the substance was available, and he was alone, unable to pass through Southeast Asia, and in the end, he had to gamble just to eat decently. But the more he looked at it, the more he thought it didn't seem like gambling. It was a solution to problems that even the Korean army couldn't catch. Their drugs could be a type of vaccine that an entire nation could use. Yeonwoo's father sat on a bench. He stared blankly at the river in the rain. Quite depressing, wasn't it? The guards nearby discussed Yeonwoo, saying that this kid had immunity. They said the boss had decided to take him, so Yeonwoo was definitely not just an ordinary boy. The father turned to his beloved and asked when their son had grown so big. He regretted that his wife wasn't there. She should have been. Why had she left him like this? The father asked her if he could manage on his own, if he could be a father without her. Chon approached the man, saying it was dangerous to be here alone, and suggested going inside. Suddenly, Yeonwoo's father opened up, saying he still couldn't believe it, that this was really the time they lived in, a new reality. Even if in the end they returned home, the man didn't know how he should feel. Choan said he had felt that way for decades. He never thought it was scary, but there was no solution. Their bodies were ruined. When he tried to forget reality, alcohol helped. Choan admitted he still envied the man because he had a family, even if it was just one person. Meanwhile, there were screams in the car. Ham Song-yu was being targeted. Isuri said that an infected person should be isolated. Those were the rules. Ham Song-yu begged Isuri to calm down. She said that trash like him probably wasn't much of a quarantine target. In her eyes, Ham Song-yu looked the most dangerous. Meanwhile, everyone else was returning to the car. The chief saw this horrifying scene and asked the kids what they were all doing, after which he grabbed the barrel of a gun. He took it and handed it to Isuri. He acted calmly, as if nothing had happened, and asked if she was in her right mind. Yeonwoo silently observed this. Suddenly he felt something. The chief ordered Isuri not to aim the weapon at people on the same side as her, especially in someone else's car. Of course, unless Isuri herself wanted a hole in her head. Yeonwoo didn't hear what was happening at all. Everything was swimming before his eyes, as if he were also under the influence of drugs. Isuri looked sideways at Sang-juna and asked to have the rifle back. She said she understood everything. The chief wearily adjusted his glasses and asked what the hell that was. Soyon was the first to notice that something was wrong with Yeonwoo. Then his father noticed it. Yeonwoo couldn't stand on his feet, falling into the seat. The reasons for his father's panic increased. Yeonwoo was completely unsteady. Everyone rushed over. Suddenly, they all heard the same screams. They could only testify to one thing. Monsters were nearby, and they were running at them. If these were the monsters from the tunnel, then they were all under the influence of drugs. Everyone quickly began to pack into the car and set off immediately. The car sped away rapidly, as the lives of all these people were at stake. The leader asked how these monsters had appeared so suddenly, as he hadn't even seen a sign of their arrival. Meanwhile, the blogger was delighted. A smile never left his face. He was looking at his phone and feeling pleased, as if they continued to move like this. They would arrive right at that place. Yeonwoo's father asked his son to describe the pain he was feeling. The blogger thought it would make great content for him. The tremors were too strong. Perhaps it was the flesh that caused it. Yeonwoo understood nothing, but he certainly understood that losing his mind now was not an option. He felt that something was ahead all the time. Was it the first time he felt such things? But something was definitely going horribly wrong. Suddenly, the driver noticed something too, and it was definitely not something good. Birds began to fly into his mirror and simply crashed. The car suddenly slammed to a halt, losing control. The driver couldn't see anything at all, as pigeons were plastered against the windshield. They were approaching a barricade. A terrible accident was about to happen. The driver screamed. Then he slammed on the brakes. It seemed he was about to break through the floor. There was a screeching sound, and the car came to a sudden stop. And they halted. The people inside were jolted by the abrupt breaking. The first to regain his senses was Ham Song-yu. He got out of the car to check. Suddenly his expression changed drastically, for he saw a pile of bodies and cells ahead. Meanwhile, the rest in the car began to awaken. They heard someone shouting for them to get out of the car immediately. Nuna ran out and yelled at Ham Song-yu that he had run away alone. But her expression also changed at the sight of that apocalypse. Yeon-woo couldn't move. His father was holding him back. When Soyon saw what was in front of them, she screamed to Yeon-woo that they had problems right in front of them. The teenager could barely comprehend those words. He lifted his eyes and saw the horror that lay before them. And behind them, the monsters were still running and getting closer. The leader cursed that some kind of madness was happening and asked his people if they had taken drugs. Then he ordered everyone to move. Isuri suddenly turned sharply and went somewhere. Soyon noticed this. She was puzzled by how all these corpses could have been destroyed. What had killed them? Soyon ran after her and asked what she was doing while everyone else was fleeing. Then Isuri called her and handed over her weapon just like that. Soyon was shocked and didn't hide it. Isuri simply tossed the weapon into her hands. Soyon asked what she was supposed to do with all this if she didn't even know how to shoot. Isuri said that nobody cared and advised her to just try to use it. Meanwhile, the monsters were very close. The guard alerted everyone about it. Isuri ordered Soyon to exactly mimic what she was doing to shoot. She asked if Soyon hoped to just stand there until Yeonwoo showed up. So they all opened fire on the monsters. Isuri shouted at Soyon to start shooting and not to stand there like a statue. Soyon was indeed frozen in shock. Then the guard with the flamethrower pushed Isuri aside, ordering her to get out of his way, and he opened fire on the monsters. It was better than the guns. Soyon looked around in panic. She was afraid to start shooting. She didn't want to cross that threshold. She looked at Yeonwoo, who was in very bad shape, and she realized that Isuri was right. It was Soyon's turn to protect Yeonwoo, so the girl opened fire on the monsters. Meanwhile, Ham Song-yu was searching for some weapon among the corpses. He was frustrated to be alone and completely unarmed. Suddenly he noticed something on the body of one corpse. It was a radio. Cries began, drawing the attention of the others. Ham Song-yu was just shouting into the radio that monsters were attacking him, and he begged them to hurry, because it was hellishly dangerous here. Chon approached and asked what Ham Song-yu was doing with that radio. The teenager swore he heard sounds from it. Chon suggested pressing the button first, then speaking. Suddenly, the radio said that it was a restricted area for civilians and asked why they were there. Chon said they knew that, but a bunch of monsters had attacked them. The radio said they had been warned and ordered them to flee from there. Ham Song-yu was furious. He shouted for them to come and save them, as soldiers were supposed to protect civilians. Then someone tried to take the radio away. It was Soyon. She began to speak about a person with immunity, that such a person was among them. She understood that this would definitely interest the soldiers. Soyon said she had helped kill monsters at the Han River before she wore a white cap, and the soldiers had asked her about it. They had met here. And then the radio said that the soldiers on the operation near the Han had to find them. Soyon begged them to believe her. There was a last hope and desperation in her voice. The radio asked them to wait a moment. The others heard this. It probably meant that the military would arrive to save them. The leader said it was wonderful and suggested they hold on until their rescue. Meanwhile, they were all being filmed. The blogger laughed, calling them all idiots. For some reason, he felt his superiority over them, a typical narcissist, because they still didn't know they had opened the gates to hell. Why did they even think that all these corpses of soldiers had been destroyed? The monsters were approaching. Nothing was stopping them. When suddenly something damn strange happened. They all began to flee back, just like that. The monsters were retreating, but it wasn't Yeonwoo's fault. Suddenly the guard felt sharply unwell. He fell, his body contorting as if from sudden pain. The leader noticed this and asked what had happened. The guard was holding his stomach. Something was trembling there. Suddenly something began to emerge from there, as if a monster appeared from nowhere. Its body began to assemble from tiny cells like a ghost. Huge, unlike any other monster, its mere appearance instilled fear, and it immediately lunged at the guard. Everyone was in shock and didn't know what to do. The monster simply devoured their comrade and no one dared to open fire. Isuri reacted faster and snatched the flamethrower from the guard. She said she had dealt with such things before. There was no other option. The monster was simply devouring the poor man. Isuri opened fire on them. She understood that they had to burn it as quickly as possible, because the monsters were weak against fire. But something very strange was happening. something she had never seen before. Isuri stood in shock, unable to believe her eyes. The monster began to grow something white that resisted the flames. It seemed to be its bones, and it was terrifying as hell. Now no one knew what to do. Isuri realized that this was the end for her. There was no fear in her eyes, it looked like despair. The monster immediately lunged at her. She had provoked such an evolution in it herself.